Taking the stage is Jarvis Robinson, Senior Director, Product Security at Xylem Inc., who will be presenting Watershed Moment, Solving Cybersecurity in Water Through Shared Responsibility.
Hey. Hi, everybody. How you doing? All right. Real quick, anybody not heard of Iron Man or Avengers? All right, we're on a good path. So you probably know I get this all the time, right? Jarvis, who's this, aren't you that AI guy? Yes, maybe. And so, like the Avengers, yes, there are some parallels, right? The Avengers help keep the bad guys out, keep the Earth safe, working with heroes. And I've worked with heroes like you guys from the ICS community, different sectors over the past 20 years, protecting some of the Earth's most critical resources, including cybersecurity protections and practices, building trustworthy systems and the like. So there are some parallels between the Avengers and Jarvis. Yes, I am Jarvis. Part of what I do is really taking a consultative role to cybersecurity, right? And so, again, that involves working with teams, working with organizations, looking at new technologies. A lot of cases, there is no scanner. There is no easy button for that. How do we make technology suitable? How do we build in the right practices to help reach positive outcomes? So that's really what I've been about over the past 20 years. I've worked in various organizations, various sectors, small, medium, large, different challenges. And, again, the common thread is just helping us to solve problems by working together. In my current role as Senior Director of Product Security at Xylem, which is a provider of digital technologies, solutions, services in the water sector, my team's mission is really to work with product development, those who support the supply chain, to pretty much embed cybersecurity practices and protections across all critical phases of water. And it's not an easy task. So for those who work in the water sector, I definitely commend you. It is tough, and that's what we're going to talk about today. How do we overcome those challenges? All right, so again, for today, the purpose of my talk is to inform, to equip, and to continue to encourage. I'm going to really focus and talk on a few topics related to water, but I really want to share some insights with members of the ICS community, that aren't necessarily water-centric, that you can take hold of, and hopefully I'll leave you with things that you can apply right away. So with that, we're going to get started. Just real quick, show of hands, how many of you work directly in the water sector? Okay, great. And for those who don't, again, I will cover some themes that aren't necessarily water-centric, but I definitely, again, commend those who work hard front to back in the water sector. It isn't easy, and I really commend you for doing what you do and keeping water safe and secure. So thank you. All right, so why do I call this a watershed moment? Overall, it's a pivotal time in water. It's a time where a lot of things are converging. And I'm not saying that to say on this date, all of a sudden it's a watershed moment. Those who work in the water sector know this has been taking place for several years, right? So, on one hand, we've got opportunities that lie in using digital technologies. We can reap, efficiencies, reach new heights. We can manage our ops more effectively than before with digital. Connecting things in different ways has a lot of promise. On the other hand, yes, there's the realities and there's the challenges that come with even being able to tap into digital and all the benefits that it can provide. And that's particularly the case in the water sector, which you'll hear about. There are challenges, there are risks involved with connecting things up, as we know. But I'm here to tell you that through working together, taking some incremental steps, that can pay off big, including utilizing digital technologies in the right way, making them safe and secure, and building a cybersecurity strategy that includes some paramount things like shared responsibility, which is really, in my opinion, it's not so much a technology thing, it's really about tapping into the power of collaboration. And so we'll talk about some best practices that you can take hold of in that regard. So before we get into that, let's just talk about the background of ICS, right? So, ICS, and if you look over the past century, ICS has gone in the past from analog devices, right? And in the water sector, we know this well. Like, it wasn't that long ago that we were dealing with, hard metal pumps. And a lot of this is still in existence, right? So hard metal pumps, analog devices, non-smart devices, let's call them. They're not digitally equipped by any means. And they've worked particularly well in the past. So we've gone from that to, even over the past 30, 40 years, PLCs, SCADA, network-equipped devices, and the like. So we're starting to see digital. And where we are right now, and I'll use the words Industry 4.0, which basically coins the present and what will take us into the future, we're seeing advances such as, industrial IoT devices on the edge. Those devices might even be equipped with AI. We're looking at software as a service running into the cloud, giving you the ability to monitor your operations more efficiently than before. Alarms, condition monitoring, and the like. Digital twin representations of what's out there in the physical world. So the possibilities are endless. There's a lot of promise, and I think the key takeaway here is the future is bright for ICS. It's going to continue to evolve if the past to present is a good indicator of that. And so, the bottom line is this is going to benefit the communities and the sectors that we serve. But of course, with all the fanfare and the promise, we know, especially when we're talking about water, the reality of the world, right? And so these are just some of the challenges. When I talk to people, and I hear a lot from folks that are living and breathing water, they know it. And I say, well, what's the issue with taking hold of digital? And they say, well, wait a minute. Before we get to digital, there are a number of things that we need to get in front of and deal with, right? So, for example, the American Water Works Association provides this report every year, the state of the water industry. And these are just some of the key touch points that have been cited. They survey the water community every year. They hear from folks front to back, and what are the pain points? And these are just some of the things that they've said, right? The infrastructure is aging, right? A lot of these water systems have gotten stood up like 20, 30 years ago. They're either approaching end of life or they're way beyond it. And people like you guys are just making it work. You find a way to get the job done, some way, somehow. And so we got to deal with that. And then there's resource constraints. So we talk about digital, but the reality is you got to have people really dealing with digital, knowing digital, understanding what to do with digital in the right way. So it's like, I hear you, digital's great, but in reality, you got to have the workforce to be able to pull that off. And right now, I can tell you what I hear from the folks that are living, breathing water, they are tapped out, they're constrained. They want to improve, they want to get prepared, but they are facing serious constraints. Funding is another opportunity. Obviously, with water, I'll tell you about that shortly, it's unique, right? It's backed by the government for the most part, and the government has to fund it. There's also awareness of the criticality of water, right? So from an everyday citizen point of view, I go to the tap and it's just there, right? And that's a big thing that we take for granted, right? If you're in water, a lot of things have to go right to deliver quality water and secure water at all times. But to the everyday individual, especially in the US, I mean, we don't see that. It just works. I mean, that's what it means to us. So we don't really see the value and what it takes to keep these systems going. And then obviously, we're here today to talk about cybersecurity. That's a big concern. The more you connect up, the more exposure you're going to have to deal with. And on the heels of that, you obviously have regulations. And so it can be a big daunting task in totality when you ask somebody from water, well, what's the problem? Why can't we use digital? So here you go. So if we focus on cybersecurity in particular, and we say, well, what are the stakes, right? We want to use digital, but what happens if we minimally focus on the challenge of getting cybersecurity right? What does that get us? So if we get cybersecurity right, well, then perhaps there might be more openness to digital, right? Because there's always this fear of, well, the more I digitally connect things, the more I expose things, the more susceptible I might be to attacks. I mean, is digital really putting us in a better off place, right? If we don't get cybersecurity right, people might not be as receptive to digital. That's a fair thing to say. But if we get it right, people are more receptive to digital. They don't have that concern. Maybe that opens the door to explore, to uncover opportunities for efficiency. Our operations can run more effectively, cheaper, better, faster than before, specifically. And we can deliver better quality of water and resilience. Of course, if we don't get cybersecurity right, then cyber gets a black eye. It's perceived as the reason why we can't take hold of digital and enjoy the benefits. Hidden risks could lie out there uncovered, right? These are just some of the downsides. You don't digitally grow, and meanwhile, you still have regulations to deal with because let's face it, the reality is things are becoming more digitally equipped whether you like it or not. Things are in your environment that are connected up, whether you know it or not. And there are going to be regulatory requirements that come with that, whether you like it or not. And above all, if we don't get cybersecurity right, we cannot keep water safe and secure. And that's our basic obligation to everyday citizens in the US and abroad. So let's talk about the water sector a little bit. So what is it that's so unique about water then? Well, I thought it would be helpful to just orient, and talk about the profile attributed to water, right? So with water, one of the things that I've come to understand is there are over 150,000 public drinking systems in the U.S., and that's pretty significant. 15,000 plus wastewater systems, okay? And that's serving 80% of the population in the U.S., and that's huge. Key topic there is public. So these systems are funded and backed by the government. These are not funded and backed largely by the private sector, as is the case with electric and gas a lot of the times. And so just hold on to that thought for a minute. Combined with that, water is considered a national critical function. That means if we don't have water, it's going to be a very, very bad day. Not just for the water sector, but for interdependent sectors, right? And you hear this term cascading effect, and we'll talk about that shortly. The other thing, the characteristics of water are such that, as we know, water is a finite source. It is very susceptible to climate events. If it floods, we got a problem. If there's a drought, we got a problem, right? So these are just some of the impacts attributed to water. It's decentralized. As I mentioned, you've got all these water systems spread throughout the United States. There's not like one centralized mechanism, as is the case a lot of times for electric, the grid. There is no water grid, right? I can't swing over the water if I'm having problems in California and swing it over from Georgia. It doesn't work like that. Also, you've got the essential to everyday life aspect. We all need water, right? So altogether, water is a big deal. The interdependencies are a big deal, right? If I have an issue in water, I'm going to more than likely have an issue with electric. I think I heard a talk yesterday that talked about facilities and the chillers. We need water to keep the chillers going. If we don't have water, the chillers don't go. So electric could have impact as a result of not having water. And then last but not least, the key cyber risks, right? So this is not a unique thing to water, obviously, but that's looking at it in isolation. If you kind of string all these things together, the fact that, no, it's not privately funded or backed. A lot of the folks that handle water are doing this on a decentralized basis. It can be considered very volatile at times due to the climate. Kind of stringing that together, if you have all those things going against you and there's a cyber attack, it's going to be a bad day for water, right? So again, we're talking about water. I'm going to touch on this briefly because I'm sure everybody's seen these types of things several times, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. But the fact of the matter is, these are just some of the trends, and this is over the past few years. Obviously, this is not everything that has been happening. This is what's been reported and publicly disclosed by CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency. But as you can see, the common thread, of course, is ransomware and unauthorized access. Again, you probably know this backwards and forwards. I don't need to kind of state the obvious. I think the concern, though, is, again, we are talking about the water sector, right? So that's a concern because with SCADA, the impact is disruption, or the consequence, rather, is disruption and corruption, potentially, of these SCADA systems, which are very critical. As I mentioned, water is a national critical function, and if we don't have water, it will have this cascade effect. Imagine the pandemic without quality water, right? That would have been bad. You guys helped to not have that happen. So again, I commend you. We need to make sure that water is protected at all times, and that's really the point here. So we've talked about the challenges and the risks, right? And so the real question is, what can we do to manage the risk? And that's really why I'm here. I'm not really here to kind of harp on the bad. It needs to be acknowledged and dealt with and understood. But really the question is, what can we do to manage the risk? So this is just, my rendition of what I would call a 5-point process around strategy. And I think it's been said before, absence of strategy, you have security whack-a-mole, right? We don't want security whack-a-mole. We need a compass. We need a North Star. We need to know where we're headed. We need to set clear direction at all times. People need to be on the same page. That's what strategy can really buy us. And I'm not saying this is the end-all, be-all. This is not the way. This is a way. So just keep that in mind. This may not be a one-size-fits-all, depending on the size and the maturity of your organization. So if you can take pieces from this, great. That's really what I'm coming to offer today. So the strategy is as follows, right? So step one, what you're going to want to do is really align, and that involves doing a discovery, right? When I say align, it really starts with understanding your organization, mission, and vision. And again, this doesn't matter like in terms of what the size of your organization is. It could be 2 guys for all I care, but you got to know, what am I shooting for? Why do I exist? What am I doing? And how do I do it? What matters most? That's my mission. And so we have to have that alignment, because when you get further in your strategy, if you're not aligned to what matters most, it's going to be hard to get the buy-in from key stakeholders that you need. Even if you're talking to the government, they're going to want to know, well, why is this important? What does this buy us in terms of security, right? So it's important to get your alignment right out of the gate. The other thing that can help you out is, and you hear this time and time again, is assessing what you have. You got to take stock. You have to have an inventory of what you have. The inventory should be backed by some sort of risk assessment to say, yes, I have 20 things, but not all these things are equally important. Like one of my colleagues always says, if everything's important, then nothing's important. So you can't say everything has to go at the same time, right? So you have to have a way of dealing with criticality. Also, you have to understand your threat landscape. So there are a lot of tools and techniques that you can use to get at this. It can be as simple as, I've seen people do a SWOT analysis. What are my strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? I've seen other people do things in the middle, like stride, dread analysis, if you've heard of that. This is just ways to really assess what could go wrong, or what are my key threats. I've seen people use MITRE ATT&CK to get at that. I've seen people use, if you've heard of the IEC 62443 3-2, which is a way of using risk, looking at impact and likelihood of occurrence. So there's all these different ways that you can get at, and quantify the risk as associated to your critical assets. One of the things that we do at my company is we get at inherent risk using IEC 62443 as well, right? And inherent risk, in a nutshell, is just about, what is the current state of the system or the thing that I'm trying to protect? And depending on who you talk to, it can be looked at without all the security controls on top, right? So just what is the inherent risk? For example, if I have an automobile and that automobile needs to be in mountainous terrain, the risk profile, the inherent risk for that guy might be high, right? I need to have the car outfitted with the hardcore tires and, the whole nine. Conversely, if I have the car in the showroom that never leaves, I don't need all that security, right? The risk profile for that is low. The one that goes up the mountain is high, right? So just to give you a flavor for what I mean by inherent risk. So that's step one. Step two is where and let me back up. So for step one, what you really want to come away with is, what is my current state profile, right? So what do I have and what am I missing essentially? What are my gaps? What are my capabilities? The second step is really about understanding, well, where do I want to be, right? So how do I close the gap between where I am now in terms of security coverage, given what matters most and what I'm trying to protect, to where do I want to be? And by when do I want to be there, right? So that's where you're setting your strategic goals, right? Which are going to be things that are out in the distant future. Oftentimes, strategic goals can take you out 2+ years. So I've seen people do it in 2 years. I've seen people do it in 3 years. These are my goals and where I want to be. Of course, you're going to have to get stakeholder buy-in as part of your strategic goals. So that's important. And that's why doing the organization alignment at the beginning will help, because when you go to your stakeholders, they're going to want to make sure that you're talking and you're on the same page in terms of what matters most to them. So if you've already done that work, it makes it a lot easier to get the buy-in by this second step. And if you are really at a point of maturity, I think the other thing that you'll need to do is set the rules, right? So you got to have a policy. So the policy is just, hey, here are my high-level rules, and you have to have a security program. The program is all about, how am I going to execute on the rules? What are the things that I need to bring to bear to execute on the rules? And so from that, you'll have your desired state and your goals. Step 3 is about, I need to establish my strategic plan, right? So this is the next level down in terms of execution. And what are the things that I need to actually make the goals a reality? And so for this, there are a number of different tools and techniques. I've seen people use things, if you've heard of the NIST System Security Plan, NIST SSP, which includes what they call a plan of action and milestones. So here's my policy, and I break down the policy in such a way that I can say, this is what I need to do to implement the policy by a certain time. These are the referral resources that are going to be involved to make this a reality, right? So it's really breaking it down. So you're obviously going to need funding. You're going to need partnership to make this happen, and we'll talk about that shortly. Step 4 is about determining additional support needs. So this is where you'll really need to reach out to other individuals if you haven't by now. That could include IT, for example. But you really want to walk away with who's doing what, who's accountable, responsible, consulted with, and informed. What are my operational processes, my SOPs, and the like? Do I have a way to govern to make sure things are improving in the right way that I want over time? And then last but not least, you want to effectively execute and measure to the plan, right? You don't want to wait like whenever the goals are supposed to be due, to say, oh, shoot, we are way off target, right? So you want to take discrete measurements along the way. There's a lot of resources that can help you in that regard, depending on where you are on the maturity spectrum. For example, if you are somewhere in the middle, there are models like C2M2, if you've heard of that, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model. It's free through Department of Energy, comes with a very slick tool that you can use to measure across a variety of domains. So that's one of the resources that I would definitely recommend you take a look at. So shared responsibility, and I won't touch on all of this, but the point that I mentioned earlier, like the Avengers coming together, I see ICS the same way. We have to reach out, and like my boss always says, hey, Jarvis, you got to find a buddy to help you out here. You can't just do all this stuff by yourself. No one individual, no one team can make this happen. And that's really what shared responsibility is about. I mean, we can talk about technology all day, but the biggest benefit behind shared responsibility and getting the help is the power of collaboration. Pooling your resources together to get the job done. And so some of the benefits with shared responsibility include, trusted domain expertise. And I'm talking about all varieties of shared responsibility. I throw in CISA, I throw in your AWWAs, your water ISACs are all part of that equation, not just your commercial suppliers. These are people that you can tap into, and they've looked across. They haven't just looked at one organization in water. They've looked at numerous organizations in water. They've established practices. They're building up the community, right? So this is what I mean by tapping into the power that is shared responsibility. Obviously, in the commercial sense, a lot of the suppliers that you'll deal with can offer, different benefits. For example, a lot of the software as a service that I've come in contact with is backed by AI, allowing you to search over massive amounts of data, allowing you to scale resources up and down in cases where you otherwise would not have that capability or wouldn't care to spend that time. And so again, that's what shared responsibility can do. So just the last few slides, this is just showing that there are many forms and ways where shared responsibility can come into focus. You've got your product development, you've got manufacturing, hosted services, as I mentioned, and then, of course, your partnerships and associations like your AWWAs, CISAs, and the like. But the point is they're out there. And just last couple of slides, you might be wondering, well, great, but I don't know where to begin. Part of the equation is knowing how to exploit shared responsibility, and quote me on that. Do exploit shared responsibility. And a lot of times, you just have to know where to look and what questions to ask. And these are just some examples to kind of give you a flavor, right? So you want to do this early on. Before you bring in suppliers, for example, through RFIs and RFPs, right? Asking the right questions. For example, I've seen suppliers that say, hey, this is the connectivity of this IoT device that we're going to land on your network. But when you ask them about, well, tell me about the support connectivity, you get a different answer. And the shared responsibilities that come with that are a different answer. So it's important to ask the right questions and really exploit those opportunities, even if they say, hey, we've got value-added benefits, we've got security services that we can bundle on top of that. I mean, those things will come out. In supplier risk reviews, that's another area that I've seen as well. How many of you have heard of MITRE's system of trust? All right, we got 1, 2, 3. Take a look at MITRE's system of trust, SOT. So this is a framework that you can use. They've got this huge body of knowledge that they've been building up. They've got like well over 1,000 questions that you can literally use to gauge a supplier's trustworthiness. They've got not just questions, but measures, right? So does supplier do this at 90%? Does supplier do this at 50%? Across all these different dimensions, including the security of the supplier's program, the security of the supplier's offering, and obviously the supply itself. So really, really good development on MITRE's system of trust. I would encourage you to check that out. Last couple of things, obviously, supplier contracts. Get it in writing, right? That's where shared responsibilities will particularly manifest and play out in the legally binding sense. And then, obviously, through changes to the RACI. So suppliers are going to have SLAs. Ask the right questions, such as, hey, when there is an SLA, are you factoring in product cybersecurity incidents, or is it everything else? You'll get some interesting answers through that. And just last, this is just a list of the references that I've mentioned throughout my talk. And in all, I really hope that I've shared some key takeaways for you to take hold of as part of building your strategy and thinking about shared responsibility in the sense that it can help us to build a bigger and brighter and more advanced future that is safe and secure in water. So with that, that's the end of my talk. Thanks for having me. And I don't know if there's any time for questions, but if not, I'm glad to discuss after. All right, thank you very much.